Welcome back to Lore 2 RPG, where we dive deep into gaming's greatest stories. Today, we journey into the shadowed mountains of feudal Japan to explore one of the most haunting themes in FromSoftware's catalogue, the curse of immortality in Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. Over the next couple hours, we'll uncover the twisted nature of eternal life, the price of resurrection, and the dark mythology that transforms the pursuit of immortality into humanity's greatest curse. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin this epic adventure together into a world where death is not the end, but perhaps the mercy that was denied. In the mist-shrouded valleys of Ashina province, cherry blossoms fall like tears from ancient trees, each petal a reminder of life's fleeting beauty. Yet beneath this serene landscape lies a corruption so profound that it transforms the very concept of immortality from blessing into nightmare. This is a tale of stagnation and suffering, of blood that refuses to flow and souls that cannot find peace. It is the story of how the greatest gift can become the cruelest curse. FromSoftware has always excelled at subverting expectations, taking concepts we traditionally view as positive and revealing their darker implications. In Dark Souls, they showed us that linking the fire merely prolongs suffering. In Bloodborne, they demonstrated that knowledge can drive one to madness. But in Sekiro, they tackle perhaps their most ambitious deconstruction, the very human desire to live forever. Through the lens of Japanese folklore and Buddhist philosophy, Miyazaki and his team craft a narrative that asks a fundamental question: what happens when death, the great equalizer, is removed from the equation? The answer, as we'll discover, is far more horrifying than any monster or demon the series has ever conjured. Chapter 1: The Divine Heritage and its Origins. To understand the curse of immortality in Sekiro, we must first examine its source, the dragon's heritage. This mystical bloodline, flowing through the veins of young Lord Kuro, represents one of the most twisted interpretations of divine blessing ever conceived in gaming. Unlike the immortality found in classical mythology, which often comes with obvious catches or requirements, the dragon's heritage appears deceptively benevolent. It grants resurrection, healing, and the ability to share these gifts with others. On the surface, it seems like the answer to humanity's greatest fear. But Sekiro reveals this gift for what it truly is: a parasite that feeds on the life force of others, spreading suffering like a plague across the land. The dragon's heritage doesn't create life. It steals it from those around the immortal, redistributing vitality in the cruelest possible way. Every resurrection comes at the cost of another's well-being. Every return from death, another step toward collective suffering. The origins of this cursed bloodline trace back to the divine dragon, an ancient entity from the Western lands who arrived in Japan like a falling star. This is no benevolent deity, despite its divine title. The dragon represents stagnation incarnate, a being so removed from the natural cycle of life and death that its very presence corrupts the world around it. When we finally encounter this creature in the divine realm, we find it surrounded by the withered husks of the old dragons of the tree, parasitic entities that embody what prolonged immortality does to the soul. These old dragons serve as a powerful metaphor for the game's central theme. Once perhaps, they were magnificent beings, but their immortality has reduced them to hollow shells that cough up poisonous bile and move with the lethargy of the eternally weary. They represent the endpoint of immortal existence, not transcendence, but decay that cannot find release in death. Their very presence around the divine dragon suggests that even gods are not immune to the corrupting influence of eternal life. The visual symbolism here is remarkable in its subtlety. Cherry blossoms, or sakura, appear throughout Sekiro as symbols of life force and natural beauty. They fall when Wolf resurrects, swirl around him during moments of spiritual significance, and blanket the grounds of Fountainhead Palace in ethereal beauty. Yet in the divine dragon's realm, these same blossoms only appear after we've slain the old dragons, suggesting that even the most fundamental expressions of life require death to maintain their beauty. This connects to a deeper understanding of the dragon's heritage as fundamentally unnatural. In Japanese philosophy, particularly in Buddhist thought, the cycle of life and death is sacred. Death is not an ending but a transformation, a necessary part of existence that allows for renewal and growth. The dragon's heritage breaks this cycle, creating stagnation where there should be flow, permanence where there should be change. The curse manifests not just in the obvious ways, the spreading of Dragonrot, the suffering of innocence, but in more subtle forms of corruption. Those who possess the dragon's heritage, like Kuro, are trapped in childlike bodies, unable to age or mature. They become living symbols of arrested development, forever frozen at the moment they received their immortality. This isn't just a physical limitation. It represents the spiritual stunting that occurs when one is removed from the natural progression of life. Even Wolf, who receives a portion of this immortality through his bond with Kuro, begins to show signs of this corruption. His right eye and the surrounding flesh turn white, a physical manifestation of the dragon's influence. In cut content from the game, this condition was to be called the Dragon's Eye, explicitly linking it to the stagnation of blood that characterizes Dragonrot. Wolf is slowly becoming like the dragon itself, a being caught between life and death, belonging fully to neither. The true horror of the dragon's heritage lies not in what it gives, but in what it takes away. It robs its bearers of the possibility of natural death, of peaceful rest, of the completion that comes with a life fully lived. Instead, it offers an eternity of responsibility, guilt, and gradual decay. Every moment of extended life comes with the knowledge that others suffer for your existence. Every resurrection is a theft from the living. This makes Kuro's desire to end the dragon's heritage all the more poignant. He doesn't see immortality as a gift to be preserved, but as a burden to be lifted, not just from himself, but from the world. His quest for immortal severance isn't suicidal, it's sacrificial. He recognizes that his continued existence perpetuates a system of suffering that no one should have to endure. The divine dragon's tears, which are necessary for the ritual of immortal severance, represent perhaps the only honest emotion the creature is capable of: sorrow. These tears aren't shed from pain or fear, but from the deep, abiding sadness of a being that has lived too long and seen too much. They are tears of regret, of longing for an ending that immortality has placed forever beyond reach. In this way, Sekiro begins its deconstruction of immortality not with obvious horror, but with a gradual revelation of the weight that eternal life carries. The dragon's heritage is seductive in its power, offering everything that mortal beings fear losing. But like all of FromSoftware's most effective horror, the true terror lies not in jump scares or grotesque imagery, but in the slow realization of implications that grow more disturbing the longer you think about them. The game asks us to consider, if you could live forever, but only by causing others to suffer, would you choose that existence? And if you found yourself trapped in such an existence, what price would you be willing to pay to end it? These questions form the foundation of everything that follows, setting the stage for a meditation on mortality that grows more complex and troubling as our journey deepens. Chapter 2: The Spreading Plague of Dragonrot. If the dragon's heritage represents the source of immortality's curse, then Dragonrot embodies its most visible and tragic consequence. This mysterious disease serves as Sekiro's most brilliant gameplay and narrative innovation, creating a direct connection between the player's failures and the suffering of innocent people. Every death that Wolf doesn't resurrect from increases the likelihood that Dragonrot will spread to another NPC, causing them to develop a persistent cough, weakening their vitality, and potentially cutting off their quest lines entirely. But Dragonrot is far more than a simple mechanical punishment for dying. It represents the hidden cost of immortality, the way that defying natural law creates ripple effects that spread far beyond the immortal individual. The Japanese name for the disease, Ryugai, literally translates to dragon cough, immediately linking it to the source of Wolf's power while emphasizing its most obvious symptom. However, the English localization's choice of Dragonrot adds additional layers of meaning, suggesting both the rotting decay that immortality brings and the way it corrupts everything it touches. The mechanics of Dragonrot's spread reveal the parasitic nature of Wolf's resurrection ability. When Wolf dies and resurrects at a sculptor's idol, the game calculates a chance that one of the NPCs he has encountered will contract the disease. This isn't random malice on the part of the dragon's heritage. It's a fundamental aspect of how this form of immortality functions. Wolf's resurrection requires life force, and that energy must come from somewhere. The dragon's heritage doesn't create vitality from nothing. It redistributes it, taking from the living to fuel the undead. Emma's research into Dragonrot reveals the medical and metaphysical mechanics behind this process. She discovers that Wolf's blood has become stagnant, no longer flowing properly through his body. This stagnation is both literal and symbolic. His blood cannot circulate normally because he is caught between life and death, existing in a state that nature never intended. To compensate for this deficiency, the dragon's heritage draws vitality from those around him, causing their blood to become similarly stagnant and leading to the symptoms of Dragonrot. The visual presentation of Dragonrot victims is particularly effective at conveying the disease's tragic nature. Unlike typical plague victims who might appear obviously diseased or monstrous, those afflicted with Dragonrot maintain their humanity while gradually wasting away. They cough blood, stagnant, darkened blood that represents their diminishing life force. But they continue to speak, to hope, to maintain their personalities and relationships. This makes their suffering more personal and heartbreaking than if they simply transformed into monsters. The sculptor becomes the first and most prominent victim of Dragonrot, serving as a powerful symbol of how the disease affects even the strongest individuals. This weathered warrior, who has survived countless battles and endured the loss of his left arm, is brought low by an invisible disease he cannot fight. His resignation to his fate reflects a deeper understanding of what Dragonrot represents. Not just illness, but the inevitable consequence of disrupting the natural order. Emma's emotional response to the sculptor's condition adds another layer to Dragonrot's impact. Her determination to find a cure isn't just medical curiosity. It's love and desperation driving her to understand something that defies conventional medicine. Her request for blood samples from infected NPCs turns the player into an unwilling participant in the disease's spread, forcing us to confront the faces of those who suffer for our immortality. The blood samples themselves tell a story of corruption and stagnation. The item descriptions note that the blood has a darkened, clotted appearance, mixed with what victims cough up during their fits. This isn't the bright red of healthy blood, but the dark, viscous substance of life that has begun to decay while still within the body. It's blood that has forgotten how to flow, trapped in a state between life and death that mirrors Wolf's own condition. The recovery charm that Emma creates represents hope and healing, but also guilt and responsibility. Its ability to cure all affected NPCs simultaneously suggests that Dragonrot is fundamentally a spiritual ailment rather than a physical one. The cure doesn't work through medicine, but through ritual, through the restoration of spiritual balance that the dragon's heritage has disrupted. The charm's description notes that it returns the power of life to those from whom it was stolen, explicitly framing Dragonrot as theft rather than natural disease. Dragon's blood. Droplets, the key component in curing Dragonrot, carry their own symbolic weight. These crystalline formations resemble tears or souls made manifest, pink-tinged gems that seem to pulse with inner light. Their rarity and the difficulty of obtaining them reinforces the precious nature of life force and the cost of restoration. Each droplet represents not just healing, but also the acknowledgement that immortality comes with a price that others must pay. The ritual of curing Dragonrot requires the player to visit a sculptor's idol and make an offering, transforming the act of healing into a moment of spiritual significance. The visual of Wolf kneeling before the idol, offering the recovery charm and dragon's blood droplet, frames the cure as both medical procedure and spiritual atonement. We're not just treating a disease, we're attempting to restore balance to a world that our immortality has thrown into chaos. However, the game makes it clear that this cure is temporary at best. As long as Wolf continues to die and resurrect, Dragonrot will continue to spread. The recovery charm can treat the symptoms, but it cannot address the underlying cause, the fundamental incompatibility between immortality and the natural world. This creates a cycle of guilt and responsibility that mirrors real-world discussions about the costs of extended life and medical intervention. The psychological impact of Dragonrot on the player cannot be understated. In most games, death is simply a setback, a temporary inconvenience that might cost progress or resources but carries no real emotional weight. Sekiro transforms death into a moral choice, forcing players to weigh their own convenience against the well-being of characters they've grown to care about. The sight of the sculptor coughing blood, or Inosuke's mother growing weak, creates a sense of responsibility that extends far beyond typical gameplay consequences. Some NPCs develop resistance to Dragonrot under certain circumstances, while others seem particularly vulnerable. This isn't just a mechanical convenience, it reflects the varying spiritual strengths of different individuals. Those with strong purposes or deep connections to the spiritual world, like certain faithful followers or those who have found peace, seem better able to resist the disease's spread. Conversely, those who are already suffering or spiritually weak fall victim more easily. The fact that defeating the divine dragon ultimately cures the sculptor's Dragonrot suggests that the disease's spiritual nature runs even deeper than previously understood. The dragon's defeat doesn't just remove the source of the curse, it restores natural order to a world that has been fundamentally unbalanced. This cure comes too late for many victims, but it offers hope that the cycle of suffering can eventually be broken. Dragonrot serves as Sekiro's most effective critique of the casual approach to immortality found in many stories and games. It forces us to confront the hidden costs of eternal life, the way that defying natural law creates suffering that extends far beyond the immortal individual. Every cough, every weakened NPC, every blood sample becomes a reminder that immortality is not a gift, but a burden that others must help carry. Chapter 3. The corruption of the Senpou monks. Deep within the mountains of Ashina lies Senpou Temple, a Buddhist monastery that stands as perhaps the most damning indictment of humanity's obsession with immortality in all of gaming. What was once a place of spiritual enlightenment has become a charnel house of failed experiments and corrupted faith, where monks have abandoned their Buddhist teachings in pursuit of the very thing Buddhism seeks to transcend: attachment to worldly existence. The Senpou monks represent immortality's corruption of religious devotion, showing how the promise of eternal life can twist even the most sacred beliefs into something monstrous. Their story is one of good intentions perverted by desire, of wisdom replaced by obsession, and of compassion sacrificed on the altar of selfish ambition. In their pursuit of the undying, these monks have become something far worse than dead. They have become eternally lost. The temple itself tells the story of this corruption through environmental storytelling that grows more disturbing the deeper you venture. The outer grounds maintain some semblance of their former beauty, with well-maintained gardens and traditional architecture that speaks to the monastery's noble origins. But as you progress deeper into the complex, signs of decay and perversion become impossible to ignore. Buildings are filled with cobwebs and refuse. Stone floors crack and crumble, and the very air seems thick with the weight of accumulated suffering. Most telling are the countless Jizo statues scattered throughout the temple grounds. In Japanese Buddhism, Jizo is a bodhisattva who protects children and guides lost souls, particularly those who have died young. The prevalence of these statues at Senpou Temple isn't coincidental. They serve as memorials to the children who died in the monks' experiments, silent witnesses to atrocities committed in the name of spiritual advancement. The statues' traditional role as protectors of children makes their presence here deeply ironic and tragic, representing both the monks' awareness of their crimes and their inability to stop committing them. The experiments themselves reveal the full extent of the monks' fall from grace. Driven by their obsession with creating another divine child like Kuro, they subjected countless children to horrific procedures involving the rejuvenating waters and parasitic centipedes. The goal was to manufacture immortality, to replicate through science and dark ritual what the dragon's heritage provided naturally. Each failure brought only death and suffering, but the monks' immortal state ensured they could continue their work indefinitely, accumulating guilt and horror without the release that natural death might provide. The centipedes that infest many of the monks represent perhaps the most visceral symbol of immortality's corruption in the entire game. These parasitic creatures, likely inspired by the Mukadi of Japanese folklore, grant a form of twisted immortality by burrowing into their hosts and sustaining their bodies even after death. The infected monks become grotesque parodies of their former selves, motionless figures from which massive centipedes emerge to attack intruders. The visual horror of these encounters cannot be overstated. Monks who once dedicated their lives to compassion and enlightenment now serve as unwilling hosts to writhing parasites, their bodies twisted into unnatural shapes by the creatures within them. Some sit in meditation poses, suggesting they may have willingly accepted the centipedes as part of their pursuit of immortality. Others appear to have been overwhelmed by the infestation, their forms so distorted by the parasites that their humanity is barely recognizable. The centipedes themselves embody everything that Buddhist philosophy rejects about immortality. They represent attachment in its most literal form, parasites that refuse to let go of their hosts, clinging to existence even when that existence has become meaningless suffering. Their aggressive nature, when confronted, speaks to the violence that underlies the monks' supposed spiritual quest, revealing the selfishness and hunger that drove them to abandon their vows. Master of Senpou Temple, one of the few monks still capable of speech, provides crucial insight into the order's corruption. His dialogue reveals that the monks don't fully understand what happened to them. They contracted the centipedes somehow, gained immortality as a result, but remain uncertain about the mechanics or purpose of their transformation. This ignorance is particularly damning, suggesting that their pursuit of immortality was so reckless that they didn't even understand what they were trying to achieve. The Master's references to the Undying as a force that corrupted their teachings and style suggests that the monks encountered something beyond their comprehension, something that twisted their understanding of Buddhist doctrine. Where Buddhism teaches that attachment to life causes suffering, and that enlightenment comes through accepting impermanence, the monks began teaching that suffering could be eliminated through the attainment of immortal life. This represents a fundamental perversion of Buddhist philosophy, replacing wisdom with delusion. The Holy Chapter. Infested provides the clearest statement of the monks' corrupted beliefs. Written by one of their order, it declares that to be undying is to walk the eternal path to enlightenment. This single sentence encapsulates everything wrong with their philosophy. True Buddhist enlightenment involves transcending the cycle of death and rebirth through the elimination of attachments and desires. The monks, however, sought to achieve this transcendence by clinging more tightly to existence. by making their attachment to life so complete that death becomes impossible. This philosophical corruption extends to their treatment of the divine child of rejuvenation, the one successful result of their experiments. Rather than recognizing her as a person deserving of compassion and protection, they view her as a tool to be used in their pursuit of immortality. Their attempts to recapture her after she escapes to the divine realm speak to their inability to recognize the harm they've caused or the futility of their quest. The divine child's own words about the monks, that she hates them, carry particular weight given her otherwise gentle and forgiving nature. This hatred isn't born of petty grievance, but of deep spiritual understanding. She recognizes what the monks have become and what they represent, the perversion of everything Buddhism teaches about compassion, wisdom, and the acceptance of impermanence. The monks' creation of the divine child also reveals another layer of their corruption: the willingness to create life solely for the purpose of exploiting it. They didn't seek to nurture and protect a divine child, but to manufacture one that they could use to further their own immortal ambitions. This represents perhaps the ultimate violation of Buddhist ethics, which emphasizes the inherent value and dignity of all sentient beings. The architectural symbolism within Senpou Temple reinforces themes of corruption and lost purpose. The main hall, which should be the spiritual heart of the monastery, is instead filled with infested monks and the detritus of failed experiments. The Buddha statue, that should inspire devotion and contemplation, overlooks a scene of suffering and perversion. Prayer wheels that should turn with mantras of compassion instead creak ominously in the mountain wind, their spiritual purpose forgotten. The temple's collection of Buddhist artifacts, vajras, bells, mandalas, speaks to its original spiritual purpose while highlighting how far the monks have fallen. These tools of enlightenment now serve as mere decorations in a place where enlightenment has been abandoned in favor of immortal existence. The contrast between the sacred objects and their corrupted surroundings creates a sense of profound spiritual loss. Even the temple's position on Mount Kongo carries symbolic weight. In Japanese Buddhism, mountains are often associated with spiritual ascension and the journey toward enlightenment. The monks' physical elevation should reflect their spiritual achievement, but instead, their height merely provides a better view of the suffering they've caused. Their position above the world becomes a symbol not of transcendence, but of disconnection from the compassion that should define their faith. The long-armed centipede giraffe boss fight serves as a culmination of the temple's themes. This massive creature, infesting the temple's lower levels, represents what the monks' philosophy ultimately leads to: not enlightenment or transcendence, but transformation into something monstrous and alien. The boss's name in Japanese references the creature's impossibly extended limbs, suggesting the unnatural stretching and distortion that immortality brings to both body and spirit. The presence of the mortal blade at Senpou Temple adds another layer of irony to the monk's story. This weapon, capable of killing the immortal, sits in their most sacred space, while they pursue immortality with desperate hunger. The blade's very existence suggests that even they, on some level, recognize that immortality might be a curse requiring remedy. Yet their obsession blinds them to this possibility, making them unable to see the solution that sits within their own sanctuary. The armored warrior who guards the temple's bridge tells his own story of corruption and loss. This warrior came to Senpou Temple seeking immortality for his son Robert, only to find himself trapped in armor that cannot be removed and guarding a place that has abandoned everything it once stood for. His presence serves as a warning about the cost of seeking immortality, not just for oneself, but for loved ones. Even the most noble motivations can lead to tragedy when they involve defying the natural order. The ultimate fate of Senpou Temple, its gradual decay and abandonment despite the immortality of its inhabitants, suggests that immortality without purpose is just another form of death. The monks achieved their goal of becoming undying, but in doing so, They destroyed everything that made their existence meaningful. They gained eternal life, but lost their souls, becoming cautionary tales about the difference between living forever and living well. Chapter 4. The Headless: Isolation and Eternal Wandering. Among all the immortal entities that populate Sekiro's world, perhaps none embody the spiritual emptiness of eternal existence as powerfully as the Headless. These ghostly apparitions, scattered throughout hidden corners of Ashina province, represent immortality stripped of purpose, connection, and meaning. They are the hollow shells of what were once noble warriors, now condemned to an eternity of aimless wandering in spaces between the living and the dead. The Headless serve as a different kind of horror than the obvious grotesquerie of the infested monks or the tragic suffering of Dragonrot victims. Their terror lies in what they lack rather than what they possess. They are defined by absence, by the crucial elements of humanity that immortality has stolen from them. They have no heads, no faces, no identities beyond their eternal motion through the underwater caves and forgotten chambers where they make their homes. Drawing clear inspiration from Japanese folklore, particularly the Kappa water spirits and headless ghost stories, the Headless represent the cultural fear of existing between states, of beings caught in liminal spaces where they belong neither to the world of the living nor the realm of the dead. Their underwater lairs reinforce this symbolism. Water in Japanese spirituality often represents transition and purification, but the Headless cannot cross over to whatever lies beyond, trapped forever in these transitional spaces. The visual design of the Headless emphasizes their disconnection from humanity and purpose. Their bodies maintain the general shape of powerful warriors, suggesting their former nobility and strength, but their missing heads rob them of identity and expression. They cannot speak, cannot show emotion, cannot form connections with other beings. Their faces, the windows to the soul in virtually every human culture, are simply absent, leaving only empty necks that trail supernatural mist. This absence of heads carries deep symbolic meaning beyond mere visual horror. In many traditions, the head represents consciousness, identity, and spiritual awareness. By removing this crucial element, immortality has stripped the Headless of everything that makes existence meaningful. They retain their bodies, their strength, their ability to move through the world, but they have lost the capacity for thought, feeling, and spiritual connection that transforms mere existence into life. The way the Headless move through their underwater domains reinforces their spiritual emptiness. They don't patrol or guard their territories with purpose. They simply drift through the water with the aimless motion of creatures who have forgotten why they exist. Their movements are graceful in a way that suggests their former martial prowess, but that grace now serves no purpose beyond the perpetuation of meaningless motion. Their connection to water deserves special attention, as it adds layers of meaning to their symbolic function. In Japanese Buddhism, water often represents the flow of existence and the cleansing properties of spiritual progress. The Headless exist in water, but gain no purification from it. They move through this element of transition, but never arrive anywhere. They are trapped in a state of eternal cleansing that never cleanses, perpetual motion toward a destination they can never reach. The terror field that surrounds the Headless provides one of Sekiro's most effective gameplay representations of existential dread. When Wolf enters their presence, his movement slows dramatically, and the screen fills with ghostly imagery that suggests glimpses into the realm of the dead. This isn't just a combat mechanic, it's a representation of how proximity to meaningless immortality saps the will to live. The Headless radiates spiritual emptiness so profound that it affects even those who merely come near them. The pacifying agent required to dispel this terror field carries its own symbolic weight. This item, made from materials that represent spiritual purification and protection, suggests that the horror of the Headless lies not in their physical threat, but in their spiritual emptiness. The terror they inspire comes from the recognition of what immortality without purpose looks like, an existence so hollow that it drains meaning from everything around it. The rewards for defeating the headless reinforce their symbolic function as warnings about immortal existence. The spiritful items they drop grant temporary supernatural abilities that enhance Wolf's combat effectiveness, but they come at the cost of spiritual energy and gradually drain his vitality. These rewards offer power at the expense of life force, mirroring the bargain that immortality represents. Strength that comes at the cost of something more fundamental and valuable. The underwater nature of the headless encounters creates a unique form of environmental storytelling. These spaces feel removed from the normal world, existing in a state of suspension where time seems to move differently. The difficulty of navigating underwater, the limited vision, and the muffled sounds all contribute to a sense of being trapped in a space between life and death. These aren't just hidden boss arenas. They're representations of the liminal existence that immortality creates. The fact that the headless are completely optional encounters adds to their effectiveness as symbols. Players can choose to avoid them entirely, leaving them to their eternal wandering in the dark corners of the world. This choice reflects how immortal beings might gradually fade from relevance, becoming increasingly isolated as the world moves on around them. They exist, but their existence matters to no one, including themselves. The variety among the headless, some wielding different weapons, some accompanied by additional spirits, suggests they were once individual warriors with their own identities and purposes. Now, these distinctions matter little. Whatever made them unique in life has been eroded by their immortal existence, leaving only the basic framework of their former selves. They are warnings about how immortality can reduce complex, meaningful lives to simple, repetitive existence. The headless's relationship to the spiritual realm becomes even more significant when considered alongside Sekiro's broader themes about the importance of death in giving life meaning. These beings exist in a state where they can neither fully live nor properly die, trapped in a condition that renders both states meaningless. They cannot grow, change, or progress because growth requires the possibility of endings, of transitions from one state to another. Their presence in sacred or hidden spaces throughout Ashina suggests that immortality creates a kind of spiritual pollution, contaminating places that should be sources of life and renewal. The headless don't simply exist in these spaces, they transform them into extensions of their own emptiness. Temples become mausoleums, natural springs become stagnant pools, and places of beauty become reminders of what immortality steals from the world. The psychological impact of encountering the headless extends beyond their immediate threat. They force players to confront the possibility that immortality might not be an escape from death, but a trap that makes death impossible. The horror they represent isn't the fear of dying, but the fear of existing without purpose, of continuing to move through the world long after all meaning has been stripped away. In many ways, the headless represent the endpoint of all the other forms of corrupted immortality in Sekiro. The Senpou monks retain their obsession and purpose, even if that purpose became twisted. The victims of Dragonrot maintain their personalities and relationships even as they waste away. But the headless have lost everything except pure existence, becoming cautionary tales about what remains when immortality has consumed everything that makes life worth living. Their silence speaks volumes about the isolation that immortality brings. Unable to communicate, they cannot form connections with other beings or share their experiences of eternal existence. They are condemned to a solitude so complete that it transforms into a kind of spiritual death, even as their bodies continue to move through the world. They exist, but their existence matters to no one, least of all themselves. The Headless ultimately serve as Sekiro's most profound meditation on the relationship between meaning and mortality. They demonstrate that existence without the possibility of ending becomes a kind of hell, that immortality divorced from purpose and connection transforms into the very thing it was meant to avoid, a form of death that never ends. They are the shadows cast by humanity's desire to live forever, warnings about what we might become if we achieved our greatest dream. Chapter 5: The Palace Nobles and the Corruption of Paradise. High above the mortal world, in the ethereal beauty of Fountainhead Palace, dwells a community that represents perhaps the most seductive face of immortality's curse. The Palace Nobles, transformed by their consumption of the rejuvenating waters, embody the promise of eternal youth and beauty while simultaneously revealing the spiritual emptiness that underlies such superficial perfection. They are living contradictions, beings of ethereal beauty whose existence has become meaningless, inhabitants of paradise who have lost the capacity to appreciate their surroundings. Fountainhead Palace itself serves as a masterclass in environmental storytelling, presenting an otherworldly realm of impossible beauty that gradually reveals its underlying corruption. The palace floats among cherry blossoms and flowing water, its architecture defying earthly limitations, while creating spaces that feel both magnificent and alien. Every element of the design speaks to a realm where the normal rules of existence have been suspended, where beauty has been preserved at the cost of natural progression and growth. The palace nobles, who inhabit this realm, have achieved a form of immortality through their consumption of the mystical waters that flow throughout their domain. Unlike the brutal transformation of the Senpou monks or the gradual decay of Dragonrot victims, the nobles have maintained their beauty and grace while losing something far more fundamental: their humanity and purpose. They represent immortality as eternal stagnation disguised as eternal perfection. Visually, the palace nobles share striking similarities with the divine dragon, their elongated forms and ethereal appearance suggesting a transformation that moves them away from human existence towards something more divine, but also more alien. Their pale skin and flowing robes create an impression of beings who exist above earthly concerns, but this transcendence comes at the cost of connection to the world they've left behind. They have become like living artwork, beautiful to observe but incapable of meaningful interaction. The behavior of the palace nobles reveals the psychological impact of their transformation. They move through their paradise with languid grace, but their actions suggest profound boredom and disconnection. They don't appear to have goals, relationships, or purposes beyond their continued existence in this realm of artificial beauty. Their immortality has given them endless time, but robbed them of any meaningful way to spend it. The courtesans among the palace nobles add another layer to this critique of immortal existence. In traditional Japanese culture, courtesans were prized for their beauty, grace, and cultural refinement, but their lives were also structured around pleasing others and maintaining artificial perfection. The immortal courtesans of Fountainhead Palace have achieved eternal beauty but lost the human connections that gave their roles meaning. They exist as perfect performers in a play with no audience, artists whose art has lost all meaning because they no longer understand why it was valuable in the first place. The transformation process that creates palace nobles appears to be gradual and seductive, unlike the violent corruption of other forms of immortality in the game. The rejuvenating waters offer healing and restoration, promising to wash away the pain and limitations of mortal existence. For those who partake regularly, the waters gradually change their fundamental nature, elongating their forms and granting them ethereal beauty while slowly eroding their connection to humanity. This process reflects a deeper truth about the nature of immortality in Sekiro. It's not simply a matter of avoiding death, but of fundamentally altering what you are. The palace nobles haven't just gained eternal life, they've become something other than human. Their transformation speaks to the way that immortality inevitably changes the immortal, not just in body, but in spirit and purpose. The waters themselves carry symbolic weight as both blessing and curse. Water traditionally represents life, purification, and renewal in Japanese culture, but the rejuvenating waters of Fountainhead Palace have become stagnant despite their apparent purity. They no longer flow toward the sea, but circulate endlessly within the palace, creating a closed system that preserves but never progresses. Like the immortality they grant, these waters have lost their connection to the natural cycle of flow and change. The relationship between the palace nobles and the outside world reveals another aspect of immortality's curse: isolation. Their palace exists in a realm separate from the mortal world, accessible only through hidden passages and mystical barriers. This separation isn't just physical, but spiritual. The nobles have become so removed from human experience that they can no longer relate to mortal concerns or understand mortal struggles. The few palace nobles who retain the ability to speak offer glimpses into their psychological state, revealing beings who have lost the capacity for growth or change. Their dialogue suggests confusion about their own nature and purpose, as if immortality has robbed them of the ability to understand themselves. They exist in a state of perpetual present, unable to learn from the past or plan for the future because time has lost all meaning for them. The guardian spirits that protect various areas of Fountainhead Palace tell their own story about the cost of eternal existence. These beings, likely transformed inhabitants of the realm, have become so abstracted from their original forms that they exist as pure function without personality or individual identity. They represent the ultimate endpoint of the palace noble's transformation: existence reduced to single purposes, beings who have lost everything that made them unique individuals. The architecture of Fountainhead Palace reinforces themes of beauty without substance and perfection without meaning. The buildings are impossibly elegant, featuring flowing lines and organic curves that suggest growth and life while actually being static and unchanging. Every element of the design speaks to aesthetic perfection, achieved at the cost of vitality and genuine beauty. It's a realm where form has been preserved but essence has been lost. The presence of the sakura blossoms throughout the palace creates a particularly poignant contrast. These flowers, symbols of life's fleeting beauty in Japanese culture, bloom eternally in this realm but have lost their symbolic power. When beauty never fades, it loses its preciousness. When spring never ends, the cycle of seasons becomes meaningless. The eternal cherry blossoms of Fountainhead Palace are beautiful, but hollow, like everything else in this cursed paradise. The palace nobles' treatment of the carp that swim in their waters reveals another aspect of their spiritual emptiness. These fish, traditionally symbols of perseverance and good fortune, exist in the palace's pools as decorative elements rather than living creatures with their own purposes and dignity. The nobles view them as beautiful objects to be collected and admired rather than as fellow beings worthy of respect. This objectification extends to how they view everything in their realm, including themselves. The transformation that leads to becoming a palace noble appears to be irreversible, suggesting that immortality's changes aren't simply physical, but fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. Once someone has drunk enough of the rejuvenating waters to begin the transformation, they can never return to their original form or recover their lost humanity. They become trapped in their new existence just as surely as any other form of immortal being in the game. The weapons used by palace nobles reflect their disconnection from the world of conflict and struggle. Their attacks are graceful, but lack the purpose and intensity of mortal warriors fighting for their lives. They fight not because they have something to protect or achieve, but simply because combat is another way of existing in their endless time. their martial abilities have become as empty of meaning as everything else in their existence. The pot nobles, Koromori, and Haranaga represent a different facet of the palace's corruption. These beings have transformed so completely that they exist as living vessels, their humanity reduced to simple functions within the palace's economy. They offer valuable services to visitors, but their existence has become purely transactional. They embody the way that immortality can reduce complex beings to simple functions, stripping away everything that makes existence meaningful. The music that plays throughout Fountainhead Palace enhances the sense of beauty without substance that defines the realm. The melodies are hauntingly beautiful but repetitive, cycling endlessly without development or resolution. Like everything else in the palace, the music has achieved a kind of perfection but lost the capacity for growth or change. It represents the soundtrack to an eternal moment that never progresses. The relationship between Fountainhead Palace and the mortal world below reveals the isolating effects of immortal existence. The nobles have removed themselves from the cycle of birth, death, and renewal that gives life meaning, creating their own closed system where nothing ever truly changes. They exist in comfort and beauty, but have lost any connection to the struggles and joys that make existence worthwhile. The water manipulation abilities demonstrated by some palace nobles suggest mastery over their environment, but this control comes at the cost of spontaneity and genuine experience. They can shape their surroundings to their will, but they've lost the capacity to be surprised, challenged, or changed by their interactions with the world. Their power over their environment has become another form of imprisonment. The divine dragon's presence above Fountainhead Palace adds another layer to the realm's symbolism. The nobles exist in the shadow of an even more ancient and powerful immortal being, suggesting a hierarchy of eternal existence where each level brings greater power but also greater isolation from meaningful existence. The dragon represents what the nobles might eventually become, being so removed from life that they exist in realms beyond all connection to the world they once knew. The fate of those who challenge the palace nobles reveals another aspect of immortality's curse. Unlike mortal enemies who fight with desperation and purpose, the nobles engage in combat with a kind of artistic detachment. They're not really fighting for their lives because they cannot truly die, and they're not fighting for principles because they've lost connection to any values beyond their own continued existence. Combat becomes another form of aesthetic expression rather than a meaningful struggle. The ultimate tragedy of the palace nobles lies not in any obvious suffering, but in their complete disconnection from everything that gives existence meaning. They have achieved the dream of eternal youth and beauty, but in doing so, they've lost their capacity to appreciate beauty, to form meaningful relationships, or to grow as beings. They exist in paradise, but can no longer understand what paradise means. Chapter 6. The Guardian, Ape and Parasitic Immortality. Deep in the mist-shrouded depths of the sunken valley, where pure white flowers bloom in pools of stagnant water, dwells one of Sekiro's most horrifying examples of immortality's corruption. The Guardian Ape. This massive primate, initially appearing as a natural, if formidable beast, reveals in its second phase the true source of its unnaturally extended life, a parasitic centipede that has turned death itself into a cruel joke. The Guardian Ape embodies immortality as violation, showing how external forces can trap a being in existence against its natural order. The Guardian Ape's initial presentation deliberately misleads the player about its true nature. In its first phase, it appears to be simply a powerful animal defending its territory, displaying natural behaviors despite its supernatural size and strength. Its movements suggest genuine animal intelligence and instinct, from its attempts to grab and bite wolf to its use of environmental elements as weapons. There's something almost noble about this initial encounter, a creature defending the beautiful white flower that grows in its domain, fulfilling what appears to be a natural guardian role. This nobility makes the revelation of the second phase all the more disturbing. When the ape's head is severed and it should by all rights be dead, something else takes control of the corpse. The massive centipede that emerges from the creature's neck reveals that what we fought in the first phase wasn't really the guardian ape at all, but a puppet animated by a parasitic entity that had been controlling it from within. The true guardian ape died long ago. What remains is a hollow shell being worn by something alien and hostile. The parasitic centipede represents immortality as infection, as something imposed upon a being rather than chosen or earned. Unlike the dragon's heritage, which flows through bloodlines, or the rejuvenating waters, which must be consumed willingly, the centipede simply takes what it wants. The guardian ape had no choice in its immortality. It was transformed into an unwilling host for a creature that needed its body to survive. This reflects fears about immortality as a loss of agency, as something that might be forced upon us rather than freely chosen. The visual horror of the second phase confrontation cannot be understated. The headless corpse of the massive ape, animated by the centipede that stretches from its neck, creates an image that violates our fundamental understanding of how life and death should work. The creature moves with unnatural fluidity despite being technically dead, its limbs responding to commands from a nervous system that should no longer exist. It's a walking contradiction that forces us to confront the possibility that death might not be the final answer we believe it to be. The centipede itself draws from rich traditions in Japanese folklore, where such creatures are often associated with evil, disease, and supernatural corruption. The Mukade, or giant centipede, appears in various legends as a monster that devours other creatures and resists normal means of being killed. By incorporating this folklore element, Sekiro taps into cultural fears about parasites and invasion, while adding its own unique twist about the relationship between host and parasite in immortal existence. The guardian ape's behavior in its second phase reveals how parasitic immortality corrupts both host and parasite. The creature's movements become more erratic and alien, suggesting that the centipede isn't perfectly adapted to controlling the ape's body. Its attacks lack the animal cunning of the first phase, replaced by a kind of mechanical aggression that speaks to the parasite's incomplete understanding of its host. Both creatures are trapped in an arrangement that serves neither's true nature. The setting of this encounter adds layers of symbolic meaning to the guardian ape's story. The sunken valley, as its name suggests, represents a place where things fall and become trapped, where the natural flow of water and life has been disrupted. The guardian ape exists in the deepest part of this valley, guarding a pool where pure white flowers grow, symbols of beauty and innocence that contrast sharply with the corruption of immortal existence. The ape's role as guardian has become perverted. Instead of protecting natural beauty, it has become an agent of the very corruption that threatens it. The white flowers themselves carry deep symbolic significance in the context of the guardian ape's story. These blooms, necessary for one of the game's ending sequences, represent purity and natural beauty that exists despite, or perhaps because of, the presence of death and decay. The fact that they grow in a pool at the bottom of the valley suggests that true beauty often emerges from the lowest places, from the acceptance of mortality and the cycle of life and death that immortality disrupts. The guardian ape's inability to truly die, even when decapitated, reflects the way that parasitic immortality traps both host and parasite in existence without meaning or purpose. The ape cannot find peace in death because the centipede won't allow it, while the centipede cannot truly live because it lacks a body of its own. They exist in a state of mutual dependence that serves neither creature's true nature, creating a form of immortality that is fundamentally unsustainable and unnatural. The sound design of the guardian ape encounter reinforces themes of violation and unnatural existence. In its first phase, the creature's vocalizations suggest genuine animal pain and rage, sounds that evoke sympathy even as we fight against it. In the second phase, these sounds become distorted and hollow, suggesting that the voice we're hearing belongs to something that shouldn't be able to make sounds at all. The acoustic landscape of the fight transforms from natural animal conflict to supernatural horror. The weapons and items dropped by the guardian ape tell their own story about the relationship between immortality and memory. The memory of the guardian ape that players receive upon victory contains echoes of the creature's original nature, suggesting that some part of its true self persists despite the parasitic control. This raises questions about consciousness and identity in immortal beings. Does the original guardian ape still exist somewhere within the controlled corpse, aware but helpless to act? The guardian. Ape's relationship to the broader ecosystem of the Sunken Valley reveals how immortality can disrupt natural balance. As an immortal guardian, the creature doesn't participate in the normal cycles of predation, death, and renewal that keep ecosystems healthy. Instead, it exists as a static element that preserves one small area, while contributing nothing to the larger patterns of life and death that surround it. Its presence represents immortality as stagnation rather than preservation. The multiple guardian apes encountered in later optional content suggest that parasitic immortality can spread, that the centipede infestation isn't limited to a single creature. This multiplication of immortal guardians creates the disturbing possibility of an ecosystem where death becomes impossible, where natural cycles are replaced by the endless repetition of parasitic control. Each new guardian ape represents another victory for the forces of stagnation over the natural order. The fighting style of the guardian ape changes dramatically between its two phases, reflecting the difference between natural animal behavior and parasitic control. In the first phase, its attacks show intelligence and adaptation, with the creature learning from wolf's tactics and adjusting its approach accordingly. In the second phase, these adaptive behaviors disappear, replaced by mechanical repetition that suggests the centipede's limited understanding of combat strategy. The terror that the guardian ape inspires comes not just from its size and strength, but from what it represents. The possibility that death might not be an escape from suffering, but simply another form of imprisonment. The creature's continued existence after decapitation forces us to confront the horror of consciousness, trapped in a body that should no longer function, of awareness without agency or hope of release. The guardian ape's protection of the white flowers takes on new meaning when understood in the context of parasitic immortality. The creature isn't really protecting the flowers. It's been programmed by the centipede to guard them for reasons the parasite might not even understand. This raises questions about motivation and purpose in immortal beings. Do they act according to their own will? Or are they simply following patterns established by the forces that granted them immortality? The environmental storytelling around the guardian ape's lair suggests a long history of failed attempts to challenge the creature. Scattered bones and rusted weapons speak to countless warriors who sought to claim the white flowers, only to fall victim to an enemy that cannot truly be killed. These remains serve as warnings about the futility of opposing immortal forces with mortal means. But they also represent the accumulated tragedy of lives lost to something that shouldn't exist. The guardian ape ultimately serves as Sekiro's most visceral representation of immortality as imprisonment. Both the ape and the centipede are trapped in an existence that serves neither creature's true nature, bound together by forces they cannot control or escape. Their immortality offers no transcendence, no wisdom, no growth, only the endless repetition of defensive behaviors in service of a purpose that may no longer have any meaning. Chapter 7. the divine dragon and the weight of eternity. At the apex of Sekiro's meditation on immortality stands the divine dragon, an ancient entity whose very existence embodies the ultimate consequences of eternal life. This massive creature, dwelling in a realm beyond normal space and time, represents immortality not as corruption or curse, but as simple, overwhelming exhaustion. The divine dragon has lived so long that existence itself has become a burden too heavy to bear, making it perhaps the most tragic figure in a game filled with examples of immortality's cruelty. The journey to reach the divine dragon serves as a pilgrimage through the various forms of immortal corruption that plague the world of Sekiro. From the suffering of Dragonrot victims to the hollow existence of the headless, from the twisted experiments of the Senpou monks to the ethereal emptiness of the palace nobles, every form of immortality encountered in the game leads ultimately to this moment, a confrontation with the source and endpoint of eternal existence. The divine dragon's realm exists outside normal reality, accessible only through mystical means, and populated by landscapes that seem to shift between dream and nightmare. Cherry blossoms fall like snow in this space, but they fall upward as well as down, defying gravity and natural law in ways that suggest a place where the normal rules of existence have been suspended. The beauty of this realm is undeniable, but it's the beauty of a museum or a tomb, preserved but lifeless, magnificent but meaningless. The old dragons of the tree that surround the divine dragon serve as living symbols of what prolonged immortality does to the soul. These withered, diseased creatures represent the natural endpoint of eternal existence, beings so worn down by the weight of endless time that they can barely function. Their movements are slow and labored, their attacks weak and unfocused, their very existence a testament to the way that immortality eventually consumes everything that makes life worth living. The visual design of these old dragons is particularly effective at conveying the horror of immortal decay. They retain the basic form of dragons, suggesting their former power and majesty, but their flesh has become translucent and sickly. Their movements arthritic and painful. They are not dead, they cannot die, but they are not truly alive either. They exist in a state between life and death that offers the benefits of neither. The old dragon's coughing attacks, which spray poisonous bile across the battlefield, mirror the symptoms of Dragonrot in a grotesque amplification. Just as immortality causes normal humans to cough up stagnant blood, these ancient immortal beings vomit forth the accumulated toxins of their endless existence. Their every breath spreads corruption, making them living sources of the very pollution that immortality brings to the world. The divine dragon itself appears only after all the old dragons have been slain, suggesting that even in its own realm, it cannot be free of the burden of caring for other immortal beings. These creatures represent its children, its companions, or perhaps simply fellow victims of eternal existence. But they have become so corrupted by immortality that they exist only as sources of suffering. The dragon's emergence after their deaths might represent relief as much as awakening. When the divine dragon finally appears, its size and majesty are immediately apparent, but so is its profound sadness. This is not a creature of wrath or malevolence, but one of deep, abiding sorrow. Its movements are slow and deliberate, suggesting not just great size, but great weariness. Every gesture speaks to the exhaustion of a being that has existed far longer than any entity should have to endure. The dragon's missing left arm creates an immediate parallel with Wolf, who lost his left arm at the beginning of the game, but received a prosthetic replacement. This visual connection suggests a kinship between the two characters, both marked by loss and both struggling with forms of existence they never chose. The dragon's missing limb cannot be replaced, however. It represents a permanent reminder of some ancient trauma or sacrifice that immortality has preserved forever. The battle with the divine dragon unfolds less like a traditional boss fight and more like a ritual of mutual understanding. The creature's attacks are powerful, but not vindictive. They feel more like tests or communications than attempts at murder. The dragon seems to be evaluating Wolf, determining whether this small mortal possesses the strength and understanding necessary to accomplish what the dragon itself cannot: the severing of immortal bonds. The lightning that Wolf must redirect during this encounter carries its own symbolic weight. In many mythologies, lightning represents divine power and the ability to bridge different realms of existence. By catching and redirecting the dragon's lightning, Wolf demonstrates his capacity to channel forces beyond normal mortal comprehension. This isn't just a combat mechanic, it's a symbolic representation of Wolf's growing understanding of immortality and his ability to use that understanding to challenge the system that creates it. The divine dragon's tears, which serve as the key component in the immortal severance ritual, represent perhaps the only honest emotion the creature is capable of expressing. These tears aren't shed from physical pain or fear of death. What could truly threaten a being of such power? But from the deep spiritual anguish of existence that has stretched far beyond its natural limits. They are tears of relief as much as sorrow, expressing the dragon's desperate hope that its burden might finally be lifted. The process of collecting these tears requires Wolf to wound the dragon in a very specific way, slicing into its tear duct to access the precious fluid within. This action isn't cruel or violent in the traditional sense. It's more like a form of spiritual surgery, helping the creature express emotions that have been trapped within its immortal form for eons. The dragon doesn't resist this process, but seems to accept it as a necessary step towards some form of resolution. The dragon's sword, based on the historical seven-branch sword that represents diplomatic and spiritual connections between different cultures, adds another layer to the creature's symbolic function. This weapon suggests that the dragon once served as a bridge between different worlds or different forms of existence. Now, however, it wields this sword in a realm of isolation, its diplomatic and spiritual functions reduced to meaningless gestures in an empty space. The realm where the divine dragon dwells reflects the ultimate consequence of immortal existence: complete separation from the world of growth, change, and meaning. This space exists outside the normal flow of time and causation, preserved in a state of eternal present that offers no possibility of progress or development. It's beautiful in the way that paintings or sculptures are beautiful, but it lacks the vitality that comes from genuine life. The cherry blossoms that fall throughout the dragon's realm carry particular poignancy when understood in the context of immortal existence. These flowers, symbols of life's fleeting beauty in Japanese culture, fall eternally in this space, but have lost their symbolic power. When beauty never fades, it loses its preciousness. When spring never ends, the cycle of seasons becomes meaningless. The eternal cherry blossoms of the divine dragon's realm are beautiful but hollow, like everything else in this space beyond time. The music that accompanies the encounter with the divine dragon reinforces themes of majesty tinged with profound sadness. The melodies are beautiful and haunting, but they carry an undertone of melancholy that speaks to the creature's spiritual state. This isn't the music of triumph or celebration, but of endings and farewells, of ancient sorrows finally being acknowledged and perhaps resolved. The divine dragon's apparent inability to end its own existence, despite its obvious desire for release, reflects a fundamental aspect of immortality in Sekiro. It traps beings not just in life, but in specific forms of existence that they cannot alter or escape. The dragon possesses immense power, but cannot use that power to grant itself the one thing it truly desires: an ending to its eternal existence. The parallel between the divine dragon and Kuro becomes clear when we understand both characters' desires to end their immortal existence. Both possess power that others desperately want. Both serve as sources of immortality for other beings. and both recognize that their continued existence perpetuates cycles of suffering. The dragon's willingness to participate in the ritual that will sever Kuro's immortality suggests a kind of spiritual kinship between these two immortal beings. The divine dragon's tears also serve as a reminder that immortality doesn't eliminate emotion, but can trap beings in emotional states for far longer than any creature should have to endure. The dragon's sorrow isn't a temporary state that will pass with time. It's a permanent condition that immortality has made eternal. This represents perhaps the most subtle horror of eternal existence. Not just that suffering continues, but that it can never evolve or resolve. The environmental effects that occur during the battle with the divine dragon, the swirling cherry blossoms, the dramatic lighting, the sense of existing in a space between worlds, create an atmosphere of profound spiritual significance. This isn't just a battle, but a ceremony, a ritual recognition of the weight that immortal existence carries, and the necessity of sometimes choosing endings over endless continuation. The divine dragon ultimately represents the most evolved form of immortal consciousness in Sekiro's world, a being that has gained enough wisdom through endless existence to recognize the value of mortality and the importance of endings. Its cooperation in the immortal severance ritual isn't defeat, but enlightenment, the final expression of wisdom gained through eons of existence that stretched far beyond their natural limits. Chapter 8. The Philosophy of Buddhist Impermanence. To fully understand Sekiro's critique of immortality, we must examine the Buddhist philosophical framework that underlies much of the game's narrative and symbolic structure. Buddhism's central teaching about impermanence, that all things arise, change, and pass away, stands in direct opposition to the immortal existence that so many characters in the game pursue. Through its exploration of these themes, Sekiro becomes not just a story about supernatural warriors and ancient curses, but a meditation on fundamental questions about the nature of existence, suffering, and what it means to live a meaningful life. The Buddhist concept of impermanence, or anicca in Sanskrit, teaches that nothing in existence is permanent or unchanging. Everything that exists is subject to constant change and eventual dissolution, from the smallest insect to the mightiest mountain, from individual lives to entire civilizations. This isn't presented as a cause for despair, but as a fundamental truth that, when properly understood, can lead to liberation from suffering and attachment. In Sekiro, the pursuit of immortality represents a fundamental rejection of this teaching. Characters who seek eternal life are attempting to escape the very process of change and dissolution that Buddhism identifies as essential to existence. They want to preserve themselves in a particular state forever, to avoid the natural progression of growth, decay, and death that gives life its meaning and urgency. The game's numerous examples of immortal suffering serve as object lessons in why the Buddhist teaching of impermanence isn't just philosophically correct, but practically essential for well-being. The Senpou monks, who abandon Buddhist teachings in pursuit of immortality, illustrate what happens when religious understanding is corrupted by the desire to escape natural law. Their transformation into centipede-infested grotesques represents not just physical corruption, but spiritual degradation resulting from their rejection of impermanence. Kuro's desire to end his immortal existence through the immortal severance ritual represents a return to proper Buddhist understanding. He recognizes that his immortality, while granting him power and safety, prevents him from participating in the natural cycle of existence that gives life meaning. His willingness to die rather than continue living forever demonstrates the Buddhist principle that attachment to life itself can become a source of suffering. The cherry blossoms that appear throughout Sekiro carry particular significance in this philosophical context. In Japanese culture, strongly influenced by Buddhist thought, sakura represent the beauty of impermanence, flowers that bloom brilliantly for a brief time before falling away. Their beauty is intimately connected to their transience If cherry blossoms bloomed forever, they would lose their poignancy and symbolic power. The game uses these flowers to remind players constantly of what immortality destroys. The precious quality that comes from knowing something beautiful cannot last. The Dragonrot disease serves as a physical manifestation of what happens when the natural cycle of life and death is disrupted. When Wolf resurrects repeatedly, refusing to accept death and move on to whatever comes next, the energy required for these resurrections must come from somewhere. The disease that spreads to innocent NPCs represents the way that rejecting impermanence creates suffering not just for the individual, but for entire communities. The stagnation that characterizes so much of immortal existence in Sekiro directly opposes the Buddhist understanding of existence as constant flow and change. The palace nobles, trapped in their ethereal realm of eternal beauty, have achieved a kind of perfection, but lost the capacity for growth, learning, or meaningful experience. They exist in a state that Buddhism would recognize as a form of spiritual death, consciousness preserved, but stripped of the dynamic quality that makes life valuable. The concept of attachment, another central Buddhist teaching, provides crucial insight into why immortality becomes a curse in Sekiro's world. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from attachment to things that are inherently impermanent: our bodies, our relationships, our identities, our lives themselves. The characters who pursue immortality are demonstrating the strongest possible form of attachment, the refusal to let go of existence itself. The centipede parasites that grant twisted immortality to various characters represent attachment in its most literal and horrifying form. These creatures attach themselves so completely to their hosts that they cannot survive separation, creating a form of immortality based on absolute dependence and inability to let go. The grotesque nature of this arrangement reflects Buddhism's teaching that extreme attachment inevitably leads to suffering. Wolf's journey throughout the game can be understood as a gradual awakening to Buddhist truth about impermanence and attachment. Initially, he clings desperately to his duty to protect Kuro, refusing to accept that circumstances might require him to let go of this role. As the story progresses, he begins to understand that true loyalty might require helping Kuro achieve the death he desires, rather than preserving the life that has become a burden. The various ending paths available to the player reflect different levels of understanding about impermanence and attachment. The surer ending represents complete surrender to attachment and violence, with Wolf becoming a demon of endless killing who cannot accept any form of ending or resolution. The immortal severance ending shows basic acceptance of the need for endings, while the purification and return endings demonstrate deeper understanding of sacrifice and the importance of natural cycles. Emma's medical research into Dragonrot and immortality places her in the role of someone trying to understand supernatural phenomena through conventional means. Her gradual realization that the diseases and conditions she's studying aren't really medical problems, but spiritual ones reflects the Buddhist teaching that many forms of suffering stem from fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of existence. The sculptor's transformation into the demon of hatred provides a powerful example of what happens when someone cannot accept impermanence and loss. His inability to let go of his rage and attachment to the past literally transforms him into a creature of pure destructive emotion. This transformation isn't just metaphorical, it's a physical manifestation of Buddhist teachings about how clinging to negative emotions can consume and corrupt the soul. The divine dragon's willingness to participate in the immortal severance ritual represents the highest level of Buddhist understanding reached by any character in the game. Despite its immense power and apparent godlike status, the dragon recognizes that even gods must eventually accept endings. Its tears aren't just expressions of sorrow, but acknowledgements of the wisdom inherent in accepting impermanence. The cyclical nature of the game's narrative, with multiple endings that suggest the possibility of the dragon's heritage finding new hosts, reflects Buddhist concepts about samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth that continues until beings achieve enlightenment. The various endings offer different possibilities for breaking this cycle, with some representing temporary solutions and others suggesting more permanent resolution. The concept of karma, the law of cause and effect that governs moral action in Buddhist thought, appears throughout Sekiro in the consequences that follow from pursuing immortality. The suffering that immortal beings experience isn't arbitrary punishment, but the natural result of attempting to violate the fundamental laws that govern existence. Their misery serves as evidence that acting against the grain of reality inevitably creates suffering. The meditation practices referenced throughout the game, from the sculptor's Buddha carving to the various temple settings, represent traditional Buddhist approaches to understanding impermanence and reducing attachment. These practices offer alternatives to the violent pursuit of immortality, suggesting that true transcendence comes through acceptance rather than resistance to natural law. The game's emphasis on proper death and burial, seen in the various memorial sites, and the importance of honoring the dead, reflects Buddhist teachings about the spiritual significance of accepting mortality. The characters who find peace in the game are often those who have made peace with death, while those who suffer most are those who cannot accept endings. Sekiro's philosophical framework ultimately suggests that immortality represents the ultimate form of spiritual ignorance, a complete misunderstanding of what makes existence valuable and meaningful. The game doesn't argue that life is worthless or that death should be sought, but rather that the acceptance of impermanence is essential for any kind of genuine happiness or spiritual development. The beauty and horror that characterize immortal existence in the game reflect the Buddhist teaching that even the most seductive attachments ultimately lead to suffering. The palace nobles live in paradise, but cannot enjoy it. The divine dragon possesses godlike power, but cannot find peace. The Senpou monks achieved their goal of immortality, but lost everything that made their existence meaningful. Through its exploration of these themes, Sekiro becomes a playable meditation on one of Buddhism's most fundamental insights: that the attempt to preserve and protect what we value most can become the very thing that destroys its value. The game's critique of immortality isn't based on arbitrary rules or moral judgments, but on deep philosophical understanding about the relationship between impermanence, attachment, and suffering. Chapter 9: The Mortal Blade and the Necessity of Endings. In a world consumed by the pursuit of immortality, the Mortal Blade stands as both solution and symbol, a weapon capable of killing the undying, but more fundamentally, a representation of the necessity of endings in any meaningful existence. This legendary katana, hidden away in the sacred halls of Senpou Temple, embodies the game's central argument that death isn't the opposite of life, but its essential companion, the force that gives existence urgency, meaning, and ultimate beauty. The Mortal Blade's very existence suggests that even in a world where immortality is possible, there remains a recognition that such existence might require remedy. The blade wasn't created as a weapon of conquest or domination, but as an instrument of mercy, a tool for granting the ending that immortal beings cannot achieve on their own. Its presence in Senpou Temple, ironically housed in the very place where monks pursue immortality most desperately, represents the persistent wisdom that some forms of existence are worse than death. The blade's Japanese name, Fushigiri, carries deep significance that extends beyond its literal translation. The characters that compose this name speak to concepts of undying and severing, but they also reference the Buddhist understanding of attachment and liberation. The blade doesn't simply kill, it severs the bonds that trap beings in unnatural forms of existence, offering freedom from the spiritual imprisonment that immortality represents. Wolf's journey to obtain the Mortal Blade serves as a pilgrimage through the various forms of corruption that immortality creates. The path to Senpou Temple leads through areas poisoned by stagnant water, populated by creatures that exist in states between life and death. And finally to a monastery where the pursuit of eternal life has led to the sacrifice of countless innocents. Each step of this journey reinforces the understanding that immortality isn't just a personal curse, but a systemic corruption that spreads through entire communities and ecosystems. The ritual required to claim the mortal blade from the divine child of rejuvenation adds layers of meaning to its symbolic function. This innocent victim of the monk's experiments guards the blade not out of malice or power hunger, but from a deep understanding of its significance. She recognizes that the power to grant endings is perhaps the most sacred responsibility that exists, not to be given lightly, or to those who might use it for selfish purposes. The divine child's own immortality provides crucial context for her role as guardian of the mortal blade. Unlike other immortal beings in the game, she doesn't seek to escape her condition or to inflict it upon others. Instead, she accepts her role as protector of the one weapon that can offer genuine liberation from immortal existence. Her guardianship represents the Buddhist ideal of using suffering as a source of compassion rather than a cause for bitterness. The mechanics of the mortal blade in combat reveal its function as more than simply a powerful weapon. When Wolf draws the blade, he sacrifices his own vitality to fuel its power, creating a direct connection between the ability to grant endings and the acceptance of personal cost. This isn't just a gameplay balance consideration, it's a philosophical statement about the responsibility that comes with the power over life and death. The blade's effectiveness against centipede-infested enemies carries particular significance in the context of parasitic immortality. These creatures, trapped in states of existence that serve neither host nor parasite, can only find peace through the intervention of the mortal blade. The weapon doesn't simply kill them, it liberates them from arrangements that have become sources of mutual suffering, allowing both host and parasite to find the endings they cannot achieve separately. The visual design of the mortal blade emphasizes its sacred rather than martial nature. Unlike the practical weapons found throughout the game, the mortal blade appears almost ceremonial, with elegant curves and refined details that suggest its primary function is ritual rather than combat. This design choice reinforces the understanding that the blade's true power lies not in its ability to inflict violence, but in its capacity to provide resolution. The red blade technique that Wolf learns alongside the mortal blade represents a different approach to ending immortal existence. Where the blade itself offers quick, merciful death, the red technique creates a longer, more dramatic process that emphasizes the significance of what's being accomplished. This variation suggests that different forms of immortal corruption might require different approaches to resolution, from gentle mercy to dramatic intervention. The connection between the mortal blade and the tears of the divine dragon reveals another layer of the weapon's symbolic function. Both elements are necessary for the immortal severance ritual, suggesting that the power to grant endings must be combined with genuine sorrow and understanding about what's being lost. The blade provides the means, but the tears provide the emotional and spiritual context that makes the ending meaningful rather than simply violent. The irony of the mortal blade's location in Senpou Temple cannot be understated. The monks who desperately pursue immortality house the very weapon that could free them from their cursed existence, but their obsession blinds them to its true value. They see it only as another tool in their quest for eternal life, missing entirely its function as a source of liberation from the very condition they seek to achieve. The mortal blade's inability to affect certain forms of immortality reveals the complex nature of eternal existence in Sekiro's world. The blade can kill the centipede-infested and grant peace to the parasitically immortal, but it cannot directly sever the dragon's heritage that flows through Kuro's bloodline. This limitation suggests that different forms of immortality require different solutions, and that true liberation often requires more than simple violence. The ritual aspects surrounding the mortal blade's use emphasize the sacred nature of granting endings. Wolf doesn't simply swing the weapon at immortal enemies, he performs specific actions that acknowledge the gravity of what he's doing. These ritualistic elements transform combat into ceremony, violence into mercy, killing into liberation. The blade becomes an instrument of spiritual practice rather than mere warfare. The blood that Wolf must shed to activate the mortal blade's power creates a direct connection between the wielder and the weapon's function. This isn't just an energy cost, it's a reminder that the power to grant endings comes with personal responsibility and sacrifice. The wielder must be willing to share in the cost of the liberation they're providing, accepting pain and loss as part of the process of ending suffering. The mortal blade's effectiveness against the guardian ape provides one of the game's most powerful examples of mercy disguised as violence. The decapitation of the massive creature appears brutal until the second phase reveals the parasitic nature of its immortality. The blade doesn't just kill the ape, it frees both ape and centipede from an arrangement that had become a source of mutual torment, allowing both creatures to find the peace that their unnatural union had denied them. The connection between the mortal blade and various ending paths reveals its function as more than just a weapon. It's a key element in determining how the cycle of immortal suffering can be broken. Different endings require different uses of the blade, from direct violence to sacrificial ritual, suggesting that the path to resolution depends not just on having the right tools, but on understanding how to use them properly. The training required to master the mortal blade's techniques reflects the spiritual preparation necessary to wield the power of endings responsibly. Wolf cannot simply pick up the weapon and use it effectively. He must develop the skill, understanding, and spiritual fortitude necessary to grant death as an act of compassion rather than cruelty. This training process mirrors traditional martial arts teachings about the relationship between physical technique and spiritual development. The mortal blade's appearance in player hands creates a constant reminder of the weight that comes with the power to end immortal suffering. Unlike other weapons that might be forgotten between battles, the blade's presence in Wolf's arsenal serves as a persistent symbol of his growing role as an agent of liberation, rather than simply a warrior or protector. The various immortal enemies that prove resistant to the mortal blade reveal the complexity of eternal existence and the different forms that refusal of endings can take. Some creatures cling to existence so desperately that even the blade's power cannot immediately overcome their attachments, requiring multiple applications or different approaches to achieve liberation. The philosophical implications of the mortal blade extend beyond its immediate function in the game to broader questions about the nature of mercy, responsibility, and intervention in suffering. The blade forces players to consider when ending someone's existence might be the most compassionate action possible, and what qualifies someone to make such determinations. The relationship between the mortal blade and the concept of duty creates tension throughout Wolf's journey. His obligation to protect Kuro conflicts with the growing understanding that true protection might require helping the divine heir achieve the death he desires. The blade becomes a symbol of this internal conflict, representing both the means to fulfill his duty and the tool that might require him to redefine what duty means. The ceremonial aspects of the mortal blade's use in the various ending rituals transform the weapon from an instrument of combat into a tool of spiritual practice. The careful, deliberate movements required for these rituals emphasize the sacred nature of what's being accomplished, turning the granting of death into an act of worship rather than violence. The mortal blade ultimately represents Sekiro's most direct statement about the necessity of endings in any meaningful existence. The weapon embodies the understanding that some forms of life have become so corrupted or painful that death represents not failure but liberation, not defeat but victory over forces that seek to trap consciousness in states of eternal suffering. Chapter 10. The Four Paths to Resolution. As Wolf's journey through the shadowed world of Ashina nears its conclusion, he faces a choice that will determine not only his own fate, but the future of immortality itself. The four possible endings to Sekiro represent different philosophical approaches to the problem of eternal existence, each offering its own understanding of duty, sacrifice, and the proper relationship between life and death. These paths, Shura, immortal severance, purification, and return, form a spectrum of responses to the fundamental question of what should be done when immortality becomes a curse. The Shura ending represents the complete surrender to immortal corruption, the path where Wolf abandons all restraint and becomes a demon of endless violence. This transformation occurs when the shinobi chooses to obey his adoptive father Owl, rather than remain loyal to Kuro, prioritizing personal bonds over moral responsibility. The name Shura refers to a class of beings in Buddhist cosmology, demons who exist in a state of constant warfare, driven by rage and jealousy, to engage in eternal conflict. Wolf's transformation into Shura begins with his betrayal of those who trusted him most. First, he must kill Emma, the gentle physician who has shown him nothing but kindness and support throughout his journey. This act of violence against innocence marks the point of no return, the moment when Wolf chooses power over compassion. The fight with Emma is deliberately one-sided. She poses little threat to an experienced shinobi, making her death an act of cruelty rather than necessity. The battle with the aging Ishin Ashina that follows Emma's death represents the destruction of wisdom and tradition in service of immortal ambition. Ishin, despite his advanced age and failing health, fights with the desperate strength of a man trying to protect something sacred from desecration. His defeat symbolizes the triumph of selfish desire over accumulated wisdom, the victory of individual will over collective good. The narration that concludes the Shura ending reveals the ultimate consequence of choosing immortal power over moral restraint. Wolf doesn't simply kill his immediate enemies and stop. He continues killing until all of Ashina has been consumed by his violence. This isn't conquest or even revenge, but pure destruction for its own sake, the logical endpoint of immortality divorced from purpose or restraint. The psychological implications of the Shura ending extend beyond the immediate narrative to broader questions about the relationship between power and corruption. Wolf's transformation suggests that immortality doesn't just preserve existing personality traits. It amplifies them, particularly negative ones like rage, jealousy, and the desire for control. Without the moderating influence of mortality, these traits can grow unchecked until they consume everything else about a person. The Shura ending also represents the failure of the mentor-student relationship that shapes so much of Wolf's character development. By choosing Owl over Kuro, Wolf rejects the lessons about loyalty, sacrifice, and proper duty that form the foundation of his identity as a shinobi. This choice reveals that the bonds formed in childhood can become chains if they're never examined or transcended through moral growth. The immortal severance ending offers a more conventional resolution, one that acknowledges the problems of immortality while choosing the most direct solution available. In this path, Wolf remains loyal to Kuro and helps him perform the ritual that will end the dragon's heritage forever. This ending represents duty fulfilled in its most straightforward sense. The shinobi protects his master by helping him achieve his goals, even when those goals involve the master's death. The ritual of immortal severance requires Kuro to drink the divine dragon's tears and then submit to being killed by the mortal blade. This process is both medical and spiritual, requiring precise physical action combined with proper understanding of what's being accomplished. The tears serve to prepare Kuro's immortal essence for severance, while the blade provides the means to cut the ties that bind him to eternal existence. Wolf's role in this ending is simultaneously active and passive. He performs the physical actions necessary for the ritual, while accepting that he cannot control or change its ultimate meaning. This reflects the proper relationship between servant and master, where loyalty means enabling the master's choices rather than imposing the servant's preferences. The aftermath of the immortal severance ending shows Wolf taking on the role of the sculptor, carving Buddha statues while waiting for someone else to inherit his prosthetic arm and continue the cycle of duty and service. This conclusion suggests that while individual stories end, larger patterns continue, and that true service involves preparing others to carry on important work. The philosophical implications of the immortal severance ending center on the relationship between love and letting go. Wolf's willingness to kill Kuro represents not betrayal, but the ultimate expression of loyalty. He loves his master enough to grant him the death he desires, rather than forcing him to continue an existence that has become unbearable. The purification ending offers a more complex resolution, one that requires Wolf to take on greater responsibility and make greater sacrifices. This path demands that the shinobi not only help Kuro achieve freedom from immortality, but actively participate in that liberation by sacrificing his own life. The ending represents the understanding that some problems require more than technical solutions. They demand personal transformation and sacrifice. The steps leading to the purification ending require Wolf to uncover hidden truths about his own past and his relationship with the forces that shaped his life. This path demands not just loyalty to Kuro, but active investigation into the nature of immortality and the specific circumstances that led to the current crisis. Wolf must become not just a servant but a seeker of truth. The key insight that enables the purification ending comes from Emma's research and Wolf's recovered memories of his relationship with the mysterious Lady Tomo. This investigation reveals that the current crisis isn't unique. Other attempts to sever immortality have been made in the past, with varying degrees of success. This historical perspective provides the knowledge necessary to attempt a more complete solution. The ritual of purification requires Wolf to use the mortal blade on himself rather than on Kuro, accepting death as the price for breaking the chains that bind them both to immortal existence. This self-sacrifice transforms the shinobi from servant to savior, from protector to liberator. His death serves not as failure, but as the ultimate expression of the duty he has carried throughout his journey. The symbolic weight of Wolf's self-sacrifice in the purification ending cannot be understated. By choosing to die so that Kuro might live free of immortality, Wolf demonstrates the Buddhist principle that true compassion sometimes requires the ultimate gift of one's own existence. His death becomes not an ending but a transformation, a liberation that enables others to find their own freedom. The return ending, widely considered the true ending of Sekiro, offers the most complex and complete resolution to the immortality crisis. This path requires not just the severing of immortal bonds, but the actual return of the dragon's heritage to its source, breaking the cycle that has caused so much suffering throughout the game's world. The ending represents understanding that temporary solutions aren't enough. True resolution requires addressing root causes rather than just symptoms. The steps leading to the return ending demand the most extensive preparation and understanding of any path through the game. Wolf must not only master combat and navigate political complexities, but also engage with spiritual and philosophical questions about the nature of existence, duty, and the proper relationship between different forms of life. The key to achieving the return ending lies in Wolf's relationship with the divine child of rejuvenation, the sole survivor of the Senpou monk's horrific experiments. This innocent victim of immortal ambition becomes the crucial element in resolving the crisis she was created to serve. Her transformation from victim to vessel represents the possibility of redemption emerging from even the most terrible circumstances. The divine child's role as a cradle for Kuro reflects the understanding that some forms of transition require nurturing and protection rather than violence or sudden change. The return ending suggests that the proper response to immortal corruption isn't destruction but transformation, not ending, but genuine new beginning. The journey to the west that concludes the return ending represents both literal travel and spiritual pilgrimage. Wolf and the divine child, now carrying Kuro within her, set out to return the dragon's heritage to its original home, suggesting that some problems can only be resolved by understanding and addressing their origins. This journey offers hope, not just for individual liberation, but for the healing of the larger systems that created the crisis. The symbolic significance of the westward journey connects to Buddhist traditions about the Pure Land, a realm of enlightenment that lies to the west of the ordinary world. The return ending suggests that true resolution of the immortality crisis requires not just technical fixes, but spiritual transformation, not just individual liberation, but collective healing. The return ending also offers the most optimistic vision of the future among all possible conclusions. Rather than ending in death or eternal repetition, this path suggests the possibility of genuine transformation and new beginning. The divine child's pregnancy, metaphorical or literal, represents the potential for new life that isn't corrupted by the mistakes of the past. Each of the four endings reflects different levels of understanding about the nature of duty, sacrifice, and the proper response to immortal corruption. The Shura ending represents the failure to understand these concepts, while the other three represent progressively more sophisticated and complete approaches to resolution. The choice between endings ultimately depends not just on player actions, but on the depth of engagement with the game's philosophical and spiritual themes. The return ending, while mechanically the most complex to achieve, represents the most complete integration of Buddhist principles about compassion, wisdom, and the importance of addressing suffering at its source rather than just managing its symptoms. Together, the four endings of Sekiro form a comprehensive meditation on the nature of choice, responsibility, and the different ways that individuals can respond to systemic problems. They suggest that true resolution requires not just good intentions, but deep understanding, not just individual action, but consideration of broader consequences, not just temporary fixes, but fundamental transformation of the systems that create suffering. Chapter 11. The poetry of cherry blossoms and stagnant blood. Throughout Sekiro's dark meditation on immortality, one image recurs with haunting persistence: the falling of cherry blossoms. These delicate pink petals, known as sakura in Japanese, serve as far more than mere aesthetic decoration. They function as a complex symbolic language that speaks to the very heart of what the game is trying to communicate about life, death, and the terrible consequences of disrupting the natural order that connects them. In traditional Japanese culture, cherry blossoms represent the beautiful transience of life, the way that something can be most precious precisely because it cannot last. The brief blooming period of sakura trees, when entire landscapes transform into clouds of pink and white before the petals inevitably fall, serves as a natural meditation on the Buddhist concept of impermanence. The flowers are beautiful, not despite their transient nature, but because of it. Their brief appearance makes each blossom precious, each moment of their existence urgent and meaningful. Sekiro corrupts this traditional symbolism in subtle but profound ways, using cherry blossoms to represent the life force that immortality steals and redistributes. When Wolf resurrects from death, sakura petals swirl around his body, suggesting that his return to life comes at the cost of something beautiful and natural. These aren't petals celebrating life, but petals mourning the violation of natural law that resurrection represents. The visual connection between falling sakura and spilled blood creates one of the game's most powerful symbolic equations. Both are red or pink liquids that fall to the ground. Both represent life leaving the body, but they carry opposite meanings. Blood spills when life ends naturally, marking the completion of a cycle and the return of vital essence to the earth. Sakura, petals fall when immortality is practiced, marking the theft of life force from the natural world to fuel unnatural resurrection. The stagnant blood that characterizes Dragonrot victims provides a direct contrast to the flowing vitality that sakura traditionally represent. Where cherry blossoms speak to life in motion, growing, blooming, falling, and returning to nourish new growth. Stagnant blood represents life trapped in states that prevent natural flow and change. The blood that Dragonrot victims cough up isn't the bright red of healthy circulation, but the dark, clotted substance of vitality that has lost its natural movement. Emma's medical research reveals that this stagnation isn't just metaphorical, but literal. Wolf's immortal blood has actually stopped flowing properly through his body, requiring the theft of vitality from others to maintain his unnatural state. The contrast between flowing blood and stagnant blood becomes a physical manifestation of the difference between natural life and immortal existence. The cherry blossoms that blanket Fountainhead Palace tell their own story about the corruption of natural beauty by immortal existence. In this ethereal realm, sakura bloom eternally, never falling, never changing, never participating in the cycle of growth and decay that gives their beauty meaning. They have become like everything else in the palace, preserved but hollow, beautiful but meaningless, perfect but spiritually dead. The divine dragon's realm takes this corruption even further, presenting a space where cherry blossoms fall upward as well as down, defying gravity and natural law in ways that suggest complete disconnection from the physical principles that govern normal existence. These impossible flowers represent beauty divorced from meaning, aesthetics separated from the natural processes that give aesthetic experience its emotional impact. The connection between sakura and memory adds another layer to their symbolic function in Sekiro. In Japanese culture, cherry blossoms are strongly associated with remembrance and the honoring of those who have died. The brief blooming period serves as a natural reminder to remember and honor the departed while they still live in memory. Sekiro's immortal characters, however, cannot properly die and therefore cannot be properly remembered. They exist in a liminal state that prevents both natural death and natural commemoration. The way sakura petals interact with water throughout the game creates additional symbolic meaning about the relationship between life, death, and purification. In natural settings, fallen cherry blossoms often land on water, where they float briefly before dissolving and returning their essence to the cycle of life. In Sekiro's corrupted landscapes, this natural process is disrupted. The waters are stagnant, the petals don't dissolve properly, and the cycle of renewal is broken. The seasonal significance of cherry blossoms adds temporal weight to their appearance throughout Sekiro. Sakura typically bloom in spring, representing renewal, rebirth, and the return of life after winter's dormancy. The game's eternal cherry blossoms, however, exist outside seasonal time, trapped in perpetual spring that never progresses to summer maturity or autumn completion. They represent time stopped rather than time flowing, preservation rather than progression. The use of cherry blossoms to mark moments of resurrection creates a visual language that becomes increasingly ominous as players understand more about the cost of immortality. What initially appears to be a beautiful effect, celebrating Wolf's return to life, gradually reveals itself as a memorial to the life force stolen from others to make that resurrection possible. Each petal represents not celebration, but mourning. The contrast between the natural sakura found in peaceful areas and the supernatural petals that accompany immortal phenomena helps players distinguish between healthy and corrupted forms of beauty. Natural cherry blossoms appear in contexts associated with rest, reflection, and spiritual peace. Supernatural petals appear during moments of resurrection, immortal combat, and the exercise of unnatural power. The connection between cherry blossoms and the concept of mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of all things, becomes central to understanding Sekiro's critique of immortality. This aesthetic and emotional concept, fundamental to Japanese culture, depends entirely on the recognition that beautiful things must end. Immortality destroys mono no aware by removing the impermanence that gives it meaning. The blood samples that Emma collects from Dragonrot victims provide a direct counterpoint to the beauty of cherry blossoms. These samples contain the stagnant, darkened blood, that represents life force trapped and corrupted by proximity to immortal existence. The visual similarity between dark blood clots and fallen petals creates an equation between the beauty that immortality destroys and the corruption it creates. The ritual use of sakura in various healing and purification ceremonies throughout the game suggests that cherry blossoms retain some power to restore natural order even in a world corrupted by immortality. The recovery charm that cures Dragonrot is associated with cherry blossom imagery, suggesting that the restoration of natural beauty might be connected to the restoration of natural health. The way different characters respond to cherry blossoms reveals their relationship to natural cycles and the acceptance of impermanence. Characters who find peace in the game often show appreciation for natural sakura, while those trapped in immortal existence tend to ignore or be unable to properly perceive the flower's beauty. This visual language helps communicate character psychology without requiring explicit dialogue. The connection between cherry blossoms and the concept of sacrifice becomes particularly important in the game's various ending sequences. The petals that accompany Wolf's self-sacrifice in the purification ending suggest that his death represents a return to natural order, a restoration of the proper relationship between life and death that immortality had disrupted. The prosthetic arm that Wolf receives early in the game is decorated with cherry blossom motifs, creating a visual connection between artificial enhancement and natural beauty. This design choice suggests that even technological solutions to human limitations should be grounded in appreciation for natural cycles rather than attempts to transcend them entirely. The memorial sites scattered throughout Ashina often feature cherry blossom imagery, reinforcing the connection between sakura and the proper honoring of the dead. These sites serve as reminders of how death should be acknowledged and commemorated, providing contrast to the way immortality prevents proper mourning and memorial. The gradual revelation that cherry blossoms in Sekiro represents stolen life force rather than natural beauty creates one of the game's most effective examples of symbolic subversion. Players initially view the falling petals as aesthetically pleasing effects, only gradually understanding that they represent something tragic and horrifying. This transformation of understanding mirrors the broader revelation about immortality's true cost. The seasonal metaphors embedded in the cherry blossom imagery extend to the game's broader themes about cycles, completion, and the necessity of endings. Just as cherry trees must experience winter dormancy to bloom properly in spring, the game suggests that death is necessary for life to have meaning and urgency. Immortality represents perpetual spring, beautiful but ultimately sterile. The way cherry blossoms interact with different forms of light throughout the game creates additional layers of symbolic meaning. Natural sakura appear most beautiful in soft, natural light that changes throughout the day. Supernatural petals often appear in harsh, artificial light that doesn't change, suggesting the difference between beauty that participates in natural cycles and beauty that exists outside them. The preservation of cherry blossom imagery in areas touched by immortality, even as other natural elements become corrupted, suggests that beauty itself might be one of the last things to be destroyed by eternal existence. This makes the eventual corruption of even aesthetic appreciation all the more tragic. Immortality doesn't just destroy life, but eventually destroys the capacity to appreciate life's beauty. The cherry blossoms of Sekiro ultimately serve as a complex meditation on the relationship between beauty, meaning, and mortality. They remind us that the most precious things in life are precious precisely because they cannot last, and that any attempt to preserve them forever risks destroying the very qualities that made them valuable in the first place. Chapter 12. The Sculptor's Warning and the Demon of Hatred. Among all the warnings about immortality's corruption that populate Sekiro's world, none carries more personal weight or tragic resonance than the transformation of the sculptor into the demon of hatred. This weathered warrior, who serves as Wolf's first teacher, and the creator of his prosthetic arm, embodies the way that even the strongest individuals can be consumed by forces they cannot fully understand or control. His story serves as both cautionary tale and deeply personal tragedy, revealing how immortal existence can transform protectors into destroyers. The sculptor's initial presentation establishes him as a figure of wisdom and restraint, someone who has found peace through acceptance of loss and limitation. His missing left arm, lost in some ancient conflict, never fully healed, serves as a permanent reminder of the cost of violence and the importance of knowing when to stop fighting. His dedication to carving Buddha statues represents a turning towards spiritual practice and away from the warrior's path that once defined his existence. The Buddhist statues that fill the sculptor's workspace carry deep symbolic significance in the context of his character development. These carved figures represent the pursuit of enlightenment through patient, repetitive practice, the kind of spiritual discipline that traditionally helps individuals transcend attachments and desires that lead to suffering. Each statue represents an attempt to channel destructive impulses into creative expression, violence transformed into art. The gradual revelation of the sculptor's true identity as Sekiro, a legendary shinobi from a previous generation, adds layers of complexity to his relationship with Wolf and the themes of inherited violence. The sculptor isn't just a wise old craftsman, he's a former warrior who walked the same path that Wolf now travels, facing similar choices about duty, loyalty, and the proper response to immortal corruption. The concept of Shura that the sculptor introduces early in the game proves to be more than just exposition about Buddhist demonology. It's a personal confession and warning from someone who has felt the pull of endless violence. His knowledge of Shura comes not from scholarly study, but from direct experience with the psychological states that lead to such transformation. He recognizes in Wolf the same potential for both protection and destruction that has defined his own existence. The fire that burns within the sculptor, literally manifesting as flames that emerge from his body during his transformation, represents rage and hatred that has been suppressed but never fully resolved. This internal fire connects to Buddhist teachings about the way that unresolved emotional states can consume individuals from within, particularly when those individuals exist long enough for small resentments to grow into consuming obsessions. Emma's relationship with the sculptor adds a personal dimension to his gradual transformation that makes his eventual fate all the more tragic. Her affection for the man who raised her and taught her about medicine conflicts with her growing awareness that he's becoming something dangerous. This relationship forces her to confront questions about when caring for someone requires accepting that they might be beyond help. The prosthetic arm that the sculptor creates for Wolf serves as both gift and warning, a tool that can enhance the shinobi's abilities while potentially connecting him to the same violent impulses that have consumed its creator. The arm's various tools and weapons represent different approaches to conflict resolution, from subtle misdirection to overwhelming force, offering Wolf choices about how to engage with the violence that defines his world. The sculptor's knowledge of shinobi tools and techniques reveals the depth of his experience with both the benefits and costs of enhanced combat abilities. His willingness to share this knowledge with Wolf demonstrates both generosity and the kind of mentorship that passes dangerous capabilities from one generation to the next. This transmission of violent knowledge creates questions about responsibility and the perpetuation of cycles of conflict. The gradual changes in the sculptor's behavior throughout the game serve as a warning system for observant players, revealing how immortal existence can slowly erode even the strongest psychological defenses. His increasing agitation, his growing preoccupation with violence, and his eventual abandonment of statue carving all signal the approach of transformation that no one, including the sculptor himself, seems able to prevent. The connection between the sculptor's transformation and Wolf's own potential fate creates one of the game's most effective sources of personal stakes. The man who serves as mentor and father figure represents what Wolf might become if he makes the wrong choices or fails to maintain proper perspective on his role as protector. This connection makes every resurrection, every act of violence, carry additional weight beyond immediate tactical considerations. The demon of hatred that the sculptor becomes represents immortal rage given physical form, a being consumed by anger that has had centuries to grow and fester. This isn't the quick, hot anger of normal conflict, but the cold, patient hatred that can only develop over extended periods of existence. The demon embodies what happens when immortal beings have too much time to nurse grudges and develop obsessions. The visual design of the demon of hatred emphasizes both its connection to the sculptor and its complete transformation from human form. Elements of the character's original appearance remain: the missing left arm, certain gesture patterns, the general body structure, but they've been twisted and enlarged into something monstrous. This design choice reinforces the understanding that the demon isn't possessing the sculptor, but is what the sculptor has become. The fire-based attacks used by the demon of hatred reflect the way that suppressed emotions can eventually explode into destructive expression. The flames that consume the creature and spread to everything around it represent anger that has grown beyond any possibility of control or direction. This isn't the focused fire of righteous anger, but the wild conflagration of rage that destroys everything it touches. The demon's location in the burning ruins of Ashina outskirts creates a perfect environmental metaphor for its psychological state. This creature exists in a landscape of destruction, surrounded by the evidence of violence and loss that has fed its transformation. The setting reinforces the understanding that the demon isn't just angry about specific events, but has become a living embodiment of the accumulated suffering that immortal existence can create. The difficulty of the demon of hatred boss fight reflects the challenge of confronting and resolving long-standing emotional problems. This isn't an enemy that can be defeated through simple application of superior technique. It requires understanding, patience, and the willingness to engage with something that has grown far beyond its original proportions. The optional nature of the demon of hatred encounter adds significance to the choice of whether to confront this transformed mentor. Players can complete the game without facing the creature, allowing it to continue existing in its state of eternal rage. This choice reflects real-world decisions about whether to confront difficult truths about people we care about, or to allow them to remain trapped in destructive patterns. The memorial items and memories associated with the sculptor provide glimpses into the experiences that led to his eventual transformation. These fragments reveal a man who witnessed and participated in tremendous violence, who lost people he cared about, and who never fully processed the emotional impact of these experiences. His story becomes a case study in how unresolved trauma can fester over time. The Buddha statues that the sculptor abandoned as his transformation progressed serve as silent witnesses to his gradual surrender to violent impulses. These unfinished works represent the spiritual practice that might have saved him if he had been able to maintain it. Their incomplete state suggests that even the most dedicated spiritual practice can fail if it's not supported by proper understanding and community. The way other characters respond to the sculptor's transformation reveals different approaches to dealing with loved ones who have become dangerous. Emma's sorrow and sense of responsibility contrast with Wolf's more tactical assessment of the threat. These different responses reflect the complexity of relationships and the difficulty of knowing how to help someone who may be beyond help. The sculptor's final state as the demon of hatred represents the ultimate failure of individual spiritual practice in the face of systemic problems. His transformation suggests that personal enlightenment isn't enough to protect against the corrupting influences of immortal existence, particularly when that existence is embedded in systems of violence and conflict that provide constant fuel for destructive emotions. The timing of the sculptor's transformation, occurring during the final assault on Ashina, connects his personal tragedy to the broader themes of endings and resolution that define the game's conclusion. His fate serves as both warning and motivation, showing what happens when problems are left unresolved while providing additional urgency to Wolf's quest to find proper endings for the immortal corruption plaguing the world. The sculptor's story ultimately serves as Sekiro's most personal meditation on the relationship between time, trauma, and transformation. It demonstrates that immortality doesn't just preserve the body, but can also preserve and amplify psychological wounds that should have been allowed to heal through the natural process of aging, death, and renewal. His transformation into the demon of hatred represents the price of having too much time to nurse old wounds and not enough wisdom to let them go. Conclusion: the beauty of endings. As our journey through the shadowed valleys of Ashina draws to a close, we return to the fundamental question that underlies all of Sekiro's meditation on immortality. What gives life meaning? Through its unflinching examination of eternal existence and its consequences, the game provides a clear and profound answer. Life derives its value not from its duration, but from its limitations, not from its preservation, but from its willingness to transform and ultimately to end. The various forms of immortal suffering we've witnessed throughout this exploration, from the stagnant blood of Dragonrot victims to the hollow perfection of palace nobles, from the parasitic existence of centipede-infested monks to the endless wandering of the headless, all point to the same underlying truth. Immortality strips existence of the urgency, purpose, and meaning that make life worth living. Sekiro's critique of immortality operates on multiple levels simultaneously, functioning as both supernatural horror and philosophical meditation. On the surface, the game presents us with monsters and diseases, corrupted monks and ancient dragons, supernatural parasites and divine tears. But beneath these fantastical elements lies a rigorous examination of what immortality would actually mean for conscious beings forced to exist indefinitely in a world where change, growth, and resolution become impossible. The game's Buddhist philosophical framework provides the foundation for understanding why immortality becomes a curse rather than a blessing. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from attachment, from clinging to things that are inherently impermanent. The pursuit of immortality represents the ultimate form of attachment, the refusal to let go of existence itself. Every character who seeks eternal life in Sekiro demonstrates this teaching through their inevitable corruption and suffering. The dragon's heritage, which initially appears as a divine gift, reveals itself to be a sophisticated trap that feeds on the very thing it promises to preserve. By granting resurrection while stealing life force from others, it creates a system where individual immortality comes at the cost of collective suffering. This mechanism reflects deeper truths about how attempts to escape natural limitations often create new forms of harm that extend far beyond the individual making the attempt. The environmental storytelling throughout Ashina province reinforces themes about the importance of natural cycles and the danger of disrupting them. Areas touched by immortality consistently show signs of stagnation, waters that don't flow properly, seasons that don't change, ecosystems where death and renewal have been replaced by endless preservation. These corrupted landscapes serve as external manifestations of the internal corruption that immortality brings to consciousness. The character of Kuro stands as the game's moral center precisely because he recognizes the burden that his immortality places on others and actively seeks to end it. His quest for immortal severance isn't motivated by despair or self-hatred, but by compassion and wisdom. He understands that true protection of those he cares about requires ending the system that forces others to suffer for his continued existence. Wolf's journey throughout the game can be understood as a gradual awakening to the same understanding that guides Kuro. Initially focused on preserving his master's life at any cost, Wolf slowly comes to recognize that true loyalty might require helping Kuro achieve the death he desires. This transformation reflects the Buddhist teaching that genuine compassion sometimes requires letting go of our own desires and attachments. The Mortal Blade serves as both practical tool and philosophical statement, representing the necessity of endings in any meaningful existence. Its power to kill the immortal isn't just mechanical convenience, but symbolic affirmation that some forms of existence have become so corrupted that death represents liberation rather than defeat. The blade embodies the understanding that mercy sometimes requires the courage to end suffering rather than perpetuate it. The various ending paths available to players reflect different levels of understanding about the nature of duty, sacrifice, and proper resolution. The Shura ending shows what happens when immortal power is pursued without wisdom or restraint, while the other endings demonstrate progressively more sophisticated approaches to breaking cycles of suffering. The Return ending in particular offers hope that true resolution requires not just individual liberation, but systemic change. The cherry blossoms that fall throughout Sekiro serve as constant reminders of what immortality destroys. The precious quality that comes from knowing something beautiful cannot last. These flowers, symbols of life's fleeting beauty in Japanese culture, become corrupted by immortal existence into hollow decorations that no longer carry their traditional meaning. Their transformation reflects the way that immortality can preserve the forms of beautiful things while destroying their essence. The game's critique extends beyond individual suffering to examine how immortality affects entire systems and communities. The stagnation that characterizes immortal existence doesn't remain contained within individual immortal beings, but spreads outward, corrupting relationships, institutions, and even landscapes. This systemic corruption suggests that the problems with immortality aren't just personal, but collective, affecting everyone who comes into contact with eternal existence. The horror elements in Sekiro work so effectively because they're grounded in philosophical understanding rather than arbitrary supernatural threats. The centipede parasites, the stagnant waters, the corrupted monks, all of these elements represent specific aspects of what immortality does to consciousness and community. They're not just scary images, but visual representations of abstract concepts about attachment, stagnation, and the corruption of natural order. The relationship between master and servant that defines Wolf and Kuro's bond becomes a vehicle for exploring questions about loyalty, duty, and the proper response to systemic problems. Their relationship evolves from simple protection to complex collaboration in seeking solutions to problems that affect far more than just the two of them. This evolution reflects the way that true loyalty must be grounded in shared understanding rather than blind obedience. The martial arts philosophy that underlies Wolf's combat techniques reinforces themes about the importance of flow, adaptation, and responsiveness to changing conditions. The game's emphasis on deflection rather than blocking, on movement rather than static defense, reflects understanding that effective action requires engagement with natural forces rather than rigid resistance to them. The divine realm that houses the dragon represents the ultimate expression of immortal isolation, a space outside normal reality where time doesn't flow properly and where connection to the world of growth and change has been completely severed. This realm's ethereal beauty cannot compensate for its spiritual emptiness, serving as a warning about what immortal transcendence actually offers. The concept of stagnation that appears throughout the game serves as both medical diagnosis and spiritual metaphor, whether describing Wolf's blood, the waters of various regions, or the psychological states of immortal beings. Stagnation represents the cessation of natural flow and change that immortality brings. This stagnation affects not just individuals, but entire systems, creating corruption that spreads far beyond its original source. The memorial sites scattered throughout Ashina serve as reminders of how death should be honored and remembered. These locations contrast sharply with the way immortal beings exist, neither truly alive nor properly dead, unable to be mourned or celebrated, because they remain trapped in states that belong to neither life nor death. The seasonal metaphors embedded throughout the game reinforce understanding about the importance of cycles, completion, and proper timing. immortal beings exist in perpetual states that prevent natural progression. Eternal spring that never leads to summer maturity. Preservation that prevents the decay necessary for renewal. Existence that continues long after its natural conclusion. The transformation of various characters throughout the game demonstrates how immortality affects personality and consciousness over time. Rather than preserving people as they are, eternal existence tends to amplify certain traits while suppressing others, leading to increasingly extreme and unbalanced psychological states. This transformation suggests that immortality doesn't just extend life, but fundamentally alters what life means. The role of memory in Sekiro's narrative reflects understanding about how consciousness depends on the possibility of forgetting and moving on from traumatic experiences. Immortal beings retain memories that should fade with time, allowing old wounds and resentments to fester indefinitely. This preservation of memory becomes another form of suffering that immortality creates. The game's conclusion, regardless of which ending players choose, emphasizes the importance of resolution and the courage required to choose endings over endless continuation. Even the most optimistic ending requires characters to accept significant losses and changes, suggesting that meaningful resolution always involves letting go of something precious. The broader cultural context in which Sekiro operates, drawing from Japanese folklore, Buddhist philosophy, and historical traditions, grounds its critique of immortality in wisdom traditions that have grappled with these questions for centuries. The game doesn't present novel insights so much as it translates ancient understanding into contemporary interactive form. The interactive nature of Sekiro's medium adds particular power to its philosophical message. Players don't just observe the consequences of immortal existence, but participate in them, experiencing firsthand the way that repeated resurrection creates guilt and responsibility. The mechanical connection between player death and NPC suffering creates emotional investment in the game's themes that purely narrative media cannot achieve. The visual design throughout Sekiro consistently supports its thematic content, using environmental storytelling, character design, and symbolic imagery to reinforce understanding about the nature of immortal corruption. Every element of the game's aesthetic vocabulary contributes to a coherent vision of what immortality means and why it should be feared rather than desired. The sound design and musical composition of Sekiro enhance its philosophical themes through audio cues that become increasingly ominous as players understand more about immortality's true cost. The sounds of coughing, stagnant water, and otherworldly movement create an acoustic landscape that reflects the spiritual corruption at the heart of the narrative. As we reach the end of our exploration, we find ourselves confronting the same choice that faces every character in Sekiro: whether to cling to existence at any cost or to accept the natural cycles that govern all meaningful life. The game's message isn't that life is worthless or that death should be sought, but rather that the acceptance of mortality is essential for any kind of genuine happiness or spiritual development. The beauty of endings, as Sekiro demonstrates, lies not in the finality of termination, but in the completion of cycles, the resolution of conflicts, and the transformation of energy from one form to another. Cherry blossoms are beautiful precisely because they fall. Life is precious precisely because it cannot last. Love has meaning precisely because it accepts the possibility of loss. In our own world, where medical technology increasingly offers the possibility of extended life, and where the fear of death drives much human behavior, Sekiro's meditation on immortality carries particular relevance. The game doesn't provide simple answers about how long life should last or what medical interventions are appropriate, but it does offer profound insights about what makes existence meaningful and what costs we should be willing to pay to preserve life. The curse of immortality, as Sekiro presents it, isn't just a supernatural affliction, but a metaphor for any attempt to escape the fundamental conditions that give existence meaning. Whether we're talking about literal immortality or simply the refusal to accept change, loss, and limitation, the game suggests that attempts to transcend natural conditions often lead to the destruction of the very things we're trying to preserve. The 4 paths to resolution that conclude Sekiro offer different models for how individuals and communities might respond to systemic problems that seem to offer no easy solutions. From the violence of the surer path to the hope of the return ending, these options reflect different levels of understanding about responsibility, sacrifice, and the relationship between individual action and collective well-being. Perhaps the most profound insight that emerges from Sekiro's meditation on immortality is the understanding that meaning comes not from duration, but from depth, not from preservation, but from transformation, not from avoiding loss, but from finding ways to make loss meaningful. The characters who find peace in the game are those who learn to let go, while those who suffer most are those who cannot accept endings. As the final cherry blossoms fall in our imagined journey through Ashina province, we're left with an invitation to consider our own relationship to mortality, change, and the acceptance of limitation. Sekiro doesn't tell us how to live, but it does remind us that the beauty of life comes not from its permanence but from its preciousness, not from its guarantees but from its uncertainty, not from its endless continuation but from its willingness to transform, and when the time comes, to end. In a world obsessed with preservation, extension, and the avoidance of loss, Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, stands as a reminder that some things are worth preserving precisely because they cannot last forever. The game's meditation on immortality ultimately becomes a celebration of mortality, not as failure or defeat, but as the condition that makes love, beauty, courage, and meaning possible. And so concludes our deep dive into immortality's curse in feudal Japan. We've discovered how FromSoftware crafted one of gaming's most sophisticated examinations of eternal existence, revealing it not as humanity's greatest dream, but as its most terrible nightmare. The legacy of Sekiro continues to challenge players to reconsider their assumptions about life, death, and what it truly means to exist with purpose and meaning. Next time on Lore 2 RPG, we'll explore another profound meditation on existence and meaning as we delve into the cosmic horror and transcendent beauty of Bloodborne's hunt for knowledge. Until then, keep exploring those epic tales, fellow adventurers, and remember that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from accepting the very limitations we most want to escape. Before we part ways, if you've enjoyed this deep exploration into the philosophical depths of Sekiro, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps make these extended journeys into gaming's greatest stories possible, and there are so many more worlds waiting to be explored together. Thank you for joining me on this contemplative adventure through the shadows of immortality, and I'll see you in the next epic tale.